Good to go?
All right. Execute spot.
Hi guys, welcome to our talk, and we're really honored that we could speak here in front of the last Derbycon. It's time for us to go, and we've got a little bit of a tight timeline. But we really appreciate everyone coming out this Sunday morning and coming to learn about WebSockets. So without further ado, here we go. What are we going to talk about here? This is going to be kind of a tool-focused talk on a tool that we developed ourselves for WebSocket assessments. We're going to talk briefly about what WebSockets are and what types of vulnerabilities exist in them, and what tools already existed before we went and created our own to fit a specific need. And we'll follow up with how we built that in the demo. This talk is geared more towards beginner, medium level web application testers. If you've been doing web application testing for a while and you're more on the experienced high end of the spectrum, you've probably been doing web socket testing for a while and you already have your own methodology for doing that. So we're not really going to cover anything that will be necessarily new there, but our tool might be something you're not familiar with.
All right, my name is Michael Fowl. It's an honor to be here. I'm a senior security engineer at VDA Labs. We get to work on a lot of fun stuff. I have about 8 years of InfoSec experience, all with some kind of offensive focus, I guess. Who here is a bug bounty hunter? Anybody? Sweet. Okay. I got started with the inaugural Hack the Pentagon and had some fun results, and I just jumped into the bug bounty scene after that. I don't get a lot of time for it now, but it was great. Maybe I'll get back to it again. So yeah, I worked in a lot of industries. I don't see anything else. I really like web applications.
And I'm Nick Defoe. I'm the security operations manager at VDA Labs, running the team there, doing engagements. I've been in IT for over 15 years, started out in a help desk type role, and then ran a development shop for a number of years. And that's kind of where I got my web application experience before going into the offensive and testing side with VDA Labs. So I kind of have a deep web application background, and that's why I kind of took interest in this as well. So first of all, what are WebSockets? Well, technically it's one word, WebSocket, and we had to look that up in the official RFC documentation. And this is one of those, going back to my web dev days, this is one of those HTML5 features that were added to browsers and whatnot 5 to 8 years ago when we wanted to replace Flash with things that were more native in processes, right? So Flash could do things like WebSockets can do, but we wanted to not use Flash anymore. So WebSockets establish client-server connections that are bidirectional and low latency and persistent. That's the key thing, because before WebSockets, we would do something called long polling, where you basically kept a HTTP request alive for a long time to try to keep communications going back and forth. But this was designed to replace that with something that's better. And the goal is to create real-time applications that are interactive. So if you would think of something like a stock exchange that's going to show real-time updates in the price of stocks, that would be a good use case for a WebSocket. Typically, WebSockets integrate really well with HTTP. And so usually your web browser is going to use a HTTP upgrade request to request that the session upgrade to a WebSocket, and that's what one of those looks like. But web browsers are not the only things that can use WebSockets, so that's just something to keep in mind. You could have an IoT device or something like that that's going to use WebSockets for communications behind the scenes. It might use a HTTP request to start its WebSocket connection, but it doesn't actually have a browser built in that's doing anything. WebSockets are supported by all modern web browsers, and this is an example that's showing a request in Firefox. And this is actually, it's a little blurry up there, but this is a really weird one we noticed, where the browser isn't doing a WebSocket request on behalf of the user. It's doing its own WebSocket request in order to sync settings, we think, between the browser and Firefox's like cloud settings, preferences, sync sort of thing. And so this is just an example of how widespread the use of WebSockets is now, and you can discover it in many different areas. And so if you're not testing these while you're doing application assessments, whether web applications or thick applications in some cases like a browser, you're not covering all of the attack surface. So there's also tooling built into the browsers to do some inspection of WebSocket connections, and this is what it looks like in Google Chrome. Unfortunately, though, it's not the greatest way to look at what the WebSockets are doing. The data is kind of muddled. It just doesn't present very well. And so that's kind of one of the reasons there's a need to use better tools than just the built-in dev tools from Chrome, for example. And just briefly, when a new feature like a WebSocket comes out, invariably there's going to be some sort of vulnerability discovered. In this case, a new feature resulted in a new vulnerability. If you see here, we've got a origin that's different than the actual application. And this is a new, not new, it was discovered after WebSockets came out, a new type of vulnerability called Crosssite WebSocket Hijacking. And it's similar to a cross-site request forgery type issue where a third party is using your authentication cookies to make a request on their own behalf, and so that they can establish a WebSocket connection to a web application and then use it maliciously themselves instead of you and your session using it. It's not exactly the same as CSRF, though, because it creates a bidirectional communication channel, which is very different because in CSRF, you're pretty much going to be able to send requests but not receive responses back. And so it really can be a big deal. And we have actually found this on commercial products that we've done testing for in the past, which is awesome and not awesome at the same time. But we're not here to talk about new vulnerabilities in WebSockets. We're here to talk about old vulnerabilities. So WebSockets are really just a transportation layer, which means that there can be more traditional attack vectors that can be used against WebSocket connections and applications that use WebSockets. So in this case, we're going to specifically talk about SQL injection, command injection, and so on. But the problem is, how do we go about finding those? Most tooling at this point for doing application assessment is not particularly aware of WebSockets. So when you talk about a commercial, like dynamic web application testing tool, they're not going to really know what to do with a WebSocket connection. So we went and created our own tool, which will allow us to use all of the traditional valuable tools like Burp Suite, Comics, SQL Map, NoSQL Map, and so on to test against WebSockets. And it's important to know that basically, these tools are intended to work over HTTP by default. And so what we've done is created what we're calling like a shim or a proxy that sits between the tool and the actual web server that we're testing to kind of translate between the two. There are other tools out there that help do WebSocket testing, and I just wanted to make sure we cover the bases there. So the biggest one that's been around for a while is OWASP Zap. And Zap has had the capability to inspect WebSocket connections for a while, and it has also had the ability to do some limited fuzzing of WebSockets as well. We have found that that tool isn't particularly great at doing it, though, and that's part of the reason why we went down the path of creating our own kind of tooling for it. Burp Suite also recently added some additional capabilities around WebSockets, including integrating the repeater functionality to be able to talk WebSockets. And that actually came out between the time when we submitted our CFP and now. And so we were really afraid we weren't actually going to have anything to talk about here. Fortunately for us, though, the functionality that they have rolled out so far is only limited to the repeater section of the tool. And so once they, and I know already that they are planning to integrate more with the scanner and fuzzing type of capabilities. Once they have that, some of the need for our tool will decrease. That said, tools like SQL map and NoSQL map may remain superior in terms of detecting SQL injections and so on. It'll remain to be seen. But yeah, glad we still have something to talk about for the time being. And then I definitely need to mention FooBallZ in this GitHub repo here. We found this tool after we had actually gone through and built the first version of our proxy shim tool, and found out that this is actually doing something pretty similar. So we wanted to make sure we credited it up there. It takes a little bit different approach and came out around the same time as us, but parallel development, we found it after the fact and just wanted to make sure that was clear here. And then lastly, these other repos from NCC Group and this other WebSocket fuzzer, and I think the last one is a blog post of some sort. These are just some other types of methodologies that these groups have gone after for assessing WebSockets. And I think one of them specifically uses kind of pure JavaScript to do some assessment. So that's a very different approach to what we're taking, but worth noting and just having in the tool belt if you have some specific need that these might be a good use case for. So before we move on, this is what the Burp Suite repeater looks like with the WebSocket module. You can see on the left there your kind of ability to edit the payload, and then on the right has the different messages that are being sent back and forth from the server and to the server and back to the client. So very useful, but again, with Burp as it is, you don't have the ability to, say, use the intruder to pump through a bunch of different usernames or whatever that is to brute force a password or do a password spray. You don't have the ability to put in fuzzing payloads by default where you can add an SQL injection and see what happens. You just have the repeater where you're manually editing each request you want to send through. So I'm going to turn it over to Michael to cover our tool.
Awesome. I'm going to move kind of fast because we've got just a few minutes left. But yeah, the big idea here is there's current tooling for manually manipulating WebSockets. We want to use all the automation that we've used to find great bugs in normal web applications. Just put something in the middle that does that. So where did we get this idea? It first came about for us actually in the land of native code fuzzing. So I don't know if any of you saw the talk from my coworkers on Saturday, but that's something we do is we work with fuzzers and attack all kinds of applications. So this is actually a C++ application, and it takes some input on the command line, and it wraps a DLL file, and it allows us to attack it with a file format fuzzer, and that, that path of our fuzz payload coming in from the command line and then gets fed to the vulnerable function in the DLL. That's kind of like the idea here. Can we put something in the middle that will help us? So I also have a blog post on writing a fuzzing harness, which is what we're calling this. It's a common concept, but that's available if that's of interest to you. So the 10,000-foot view, basically over here on the left, we want to have SQL map, we want to have comics, we want to have all the stuff that I've used for finding bugs. And honestly, like SQL map with some custom tweaking and stuff and tamper scripts, it does way better than most of the other automated tools I've found. So like I want to use that, I want to leverage that on WebSockets and not reinvent the wheel. So the idea is that that can send traditional GET and POST requests to a loopback web server, or this web harness that's in the middle, which will then open a WebSocket request with the payload that's passed in, and that will attack the target WebSocket endpoint and method. It will then get the response back to the loopback server, which will pass it back to the SQL map. And there's some things we need to think through, like multi-threading and all kinds of stuff, because like if you're using Burp ActiveScan, it wants to hit it with 10 threads and whatever. So we definitely tooled out our script, our tool, to accommodate all of these tools, or as much as we could. At the bottom line is we're basically doing this for you. We're telling WebSockets, like, you're speaking our language now. So what does this look like? I use Python because it's Python. Why not? Do I need to explain? I mean, it's just great. So.
Hi folks, I'm Geek here. Unfortunately, we had another technical glitch, so we have no audio from here up until about the 18-minute, 10-second mark. Sorry for the inconvenience.
With over a GET request to the loopback server, just to, or the shim or the proxy in the middle, or the harness, just to get a basic request that we can then use to fuzz with a SQL map. Okay, so one of the things we're going to have to do is change this to a POST request, and then, so this is a request being sent to that harness on our loopback, and we change it to a POST, and we're going to pass in whatever we want to fuzz as the body of the POST request. So we're going to go back and get that original WebSocket payload, the login, the user auth and password, and we're going to copy that and drop that in our POST request. And that way, the loopback harness is going to know to forward that onto the WebSocket connection. So there we go. Let's see if it works. Boom. So what just happened there is we sent a traditional POST request. It got converted to WebSockets and then got sent back to Burp Suite So the translation happened. We got the invalid username and password we expected. So I'm going to copy this request, and we're going to point SQL map at this next. So I'm going to copy it. I'm a Nano fan. Sorry, Vim guys. I just am. So I'm going to throw it in there. We're gonna create just a text file with our requests. I don't know if you guys do this with SQL map much, but I like to do this. And then our SQL map command is basically we're going to do -r and point it at that request that we modeled. I toned down the threads and the delay just because my virtual machine is not super robust for this demo, but it is multi-threaded. We need to use a tamper script that does base 64 encoding of what SQL map injects, because remember, the username and password when it's sent to the WebSocket endpoint was base 64 encoded. And then I use batch just to pick all the defaults in SQL map and tables to dump tables. And let's see if we find the injection and can exploit it. So hit the almighty enter. Boom. Okay. There we go. Found the injection. It's dumping out all the tables. We hacked all the things. We dumped the schema. So all from a post request that was then translated to WebSockets and back. So that is kind of the end of this demo. I mean, you can do this with literally any of the traditional web pen testing tools that are out there. All right, 2-minute warning. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and kill this video, and there we go. Tango down. We exploited WebSockets. All right, so that is pretty much it for our research today. Hopefully that was helpful. I had a lot of fun doing it. It's an honor to be here at Derbycon, especially the last one. Yeah, we've got Twitter. Feel free to follow us. And if you have any questions, or hey, if you get a bug bounty because you use this tool or something, just let me know. It'd be a lot of fun to just know that. And there's the link again to the harness. It's already out there. Have fun, and thanks so much. Any questions?